أشرف الأنبياء والمرسلين وعلى آله وصحبه أجمعين. السلام عليكم ورحمة الله وبركاته. Honorable DATO Saifuddin Abdullah, Minister for Communication and Multimedia, Professor Emeritus Tansri Dato Zulkifli Abdul Razak, Rector, International Islamic University, Malaysia, Professor Emeritus Tansri Dr. Muhammad Kamal Hassan, former Rector, International Islamic University, Malaysia, Professor Dr. Anis Ahmad, Vice-Chancellor, Riphah International University, Islamabad, Pakistan, Professor Emeritus, Dato Dr. Usman BAKAR, Al-Ghazali Chair of Epistemology and Civilizational Studies, ISTAC-IIUM, Professor Dato Dr. Ahmad Murad Marikan, Head of Malay-Islamic Civilization Unit, ISTAC-IIUM, Deputy Rectors, Deans, Deputy Deans, Professors, colleagues, honored guests, ladies and gentlemen. I am pleased to welcome you all this afternoon to the webinar on decolonization and Islamization of the social sciences, Convergence and Divergence, organized by the International Institute of Islamic Thought and Civilization, ISTAC, International Islamic University, Malaysia, IIUM, Kuala Lumpur. ISTAC is dedicated to engaging in advanced level study and research about Islamic thought and civilization at national and global levels to nurture comparative, cultural, and civilizational studies devoted to the renewal of Islam and human civilization. Its mission is to produce a new breed of academics and scholars who are multilingual and multidisciplinary in their expertise with knowledgeable understanding of the universal message of Islam for the advancement of Islamic thought and civilization, who can address new challenges and concerns facing the Muslim Ummah and humanity, which will enable meaningful living in the 21st century globalized world. All countries, whether Muslim or otherwise, that obtained their political independence from former colonial powers are still faced with many kinds of problems that are in reality the legacies of the colonial period. The post-colonial era is still not free of the presence of the former colonial powers, although physically they have gone. Their presence is there in one form or another. One of the colonial legacies is in the field of knowledge and education. As colonial powers, they control the production, application, and distribution of knowledge. Their main objective was to sustain their colonial economy. In the post-colonial era, they still control the production, application, and dissemination of knowledge and information. They tried hard by all ways and means to maintain their control, mainly for the same reason, which is economic. One of the areas of knowledge control for which they are noted was the social sciences. To a great extent, the social sciences were created by them to serve the goals of colonialism. This is a subject on which much research has been done and many books written, especially by scholars in the social sciences from the so-called developing countries, which also happen to be the formerly colonized territories. Decolonization in the social sciences refers to the intellectual responses of academics and scholars in this field to replace colonial perspectives with indigenous ones. Efforts at decolonization in the social sciences are ongoing. Progress has been made, but decolonization efforts are still far from achieving their goals and coming to a successful end. There are still many outstanding issues that need to be tackled and resolved. We at ISTAC strongly feel that decolonization in the field of knowledge generally would achieve better results if we were to adopt a multidisciplinary and interdisciplinary approach, especially in research and learning. For this reason, the topic of our webinar today discusses decolonization together with Islamization of knowledge in a comparative way. As far as we know, this is the first time that decolonization and Islamization in the social sciences have ever been discussed. Comparing and contrasting are made on the two intellectual agendas. Like decolonization in the social sciences, Islamization in the field is also an ongoing activity. But the goals of Islamization of knowledge are still far from being achieved. Islamization of knowledge is especially important to IIUM. It is one of the foundational pillars of the university. As such, this academic agenda needs to be pursued by the university. In our view, academics involved in the Islamization of the social sciences could benefit significantly from their interactions with their counterparts in the decolonization project and vice versa. Today's webinar is based on the assumption that both decolonization and Islamization of knowledge, particularly in the field of social sciences, are essential to the Ummah. Decolonization is important to the Ummah because the greater part of it was once colonized, and the impact of colonialism on the Ummah can still be seen and felt. But for many Muslims, the effect of colonialism on their minds and their thinking does not seem to be that obvious to them. That is why Muslim academics and scholars pursuing decolonization in the field of knowledge need to share their concerns and findings with the general public and point out their significance. Colonization has also impacted Islamic life and thought. Thus, decolonization intersects with Islamization. In other words, there is an area of convergence between decolonization and Islamization of knowledge. Hopefully, this webinar would open up a new intellectual space for social scientists, regardless of whether they concentrate on decolonization or Islamization issues. The topic is quite vast, but the panelists are experts in the field. They can bring out into the open many problems and insights related to decolonization and Islamization in the social sciences that would benefit both academics and the general public. As an institute dedicated to the study of Islamic thought and civilization, ISTAC has high hopes that this webinar would generate new ideas and perspectives on the subject under discussion that would help us better understand Islamic thought and civilization during the colonial and post-colonial periods. We would like to see if there are important lessons that we can learn from the colonial period about Islamic thought and civilization so that our current programs in this area of study could be further strengthened. Please permit me to mention briefly ISTAC's new publication titled Colonialism in the Malay Archipelago, Civilizational Encounters. This book is relevant to the topic of the webinar. Those interested in civilizational intersections in the Malay Archipelago during the colonial and post-colonial periods would find this book interesting and beneficial. Copies are on sale at ISTAC. Without taking much of your time, let me end my welcoming speech by thanking you all for your interest and participation in this webinar. And I most respectfully call upon Professor Emeritus, Transri Dato Zulkifli Abdul Razak, Rector, International Islamic University, Malaysia, to share his thoughts on the theme of the webinar. فليتفضل Transri Professor.
Thank you very much, Professor Tamim. Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Alhamdulillah Rabbil Alamin. Wassalatu wassalamu syafil anbiya mursalin wa ala alihi wa sahbihi ajma'in. La hawla wa la quwwata illa billah. Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi ta'ala wabarakatuh. Yang berhormat Datuk Saifuddin Abdullah, Professor Tamim, Professor Kamal, brothers and sisters. I am indeed very honored to be invited again by virtue, I don't know what, not an expert certainly, but I am very delighted to share some of my thoughts on the topic, although I'm not a social scientist, but the idea of colonization brings me back 10 years ago when we had our first seminar in Penang. Then it was officiated by no other than the Yang Berhormat Datuk Saifuddin, then was the Deputy Minister of Education, if I'm not mistaken. So it brings back memories of what decolonization is all about. And in fact, I learned about decolonization a lot more from that seminar. Before beginning, I would want to quote Datuk Saifuddin in his opening remark, and this is put in a book on page 5, I think. And he said, so how we look at meaning, how we can measure meaning, depend on our worldview and the whole issue of definition of knowledge that I was trying to address. So I think this is what the seminar is all about. How do you find new meaning? How do you find new arrivals given the things that's happening to us? Now, from my point of view, I am not going to talk about social science per se. I'm going to take one idea that has been bugging me for a long time, and this is something that has to do with what we are going around in the country today. I think a couple of days ago, I'm fortunate enough to share the same sort of platform with Datuk Saifuddin in discussing digital economy and the 4IR. Now, this word 4IR has been bugging me a lot recently, and I would want to share that concern with you because I can feel that this could be another form of decolonization if you are not careful. IR and also artificial intelligence probably is part of science and also to a certain extent part of social science, depending on how you look at it. Now, what is my concern as far as this is concerned? One is to see what is AI in the long term. I think Prof. Fauzan can correct me if I'm wrong. I know of 3 dimensions when you talk about IR. One is about adapting, in other words, taking whatever that is given by the computer that mimics our behavior, that mimics our thinking. That's probably the lower side of artificial intelligence. We have moved into what we call machine learning. That's basically looking at prediction, making reasons, and the ability of the machine somehow or other to prompt us things of what we are doing. But again, then I think we have shifted into what we call the deep learning. We're actually the machines or the computer itself provide ideas, provide solution to problems. I think these are the big trends that is going on. I think most of us are not quite aware of what we are doing and where are we taking ourselves into. And I remember my early discussion with the late Professor Malik Badri, when we talk about the next lizard hole, which to my mind could be the technology if we are not mindful or know where we are heading. This will eventually go into what we call robotics. Human-like robots, and that's a picture of you take off the skin from the robots, you will see that is what. And I think we are trying to mimic as much as possible how do a robot behave as like a human being. that is not as scary as what I call the robot-like humans. And this is something I think that has not been talked about in many aspects. This is where the human being themselves try to behave like a robot by embedding as much as technology within himself. Could be the brain, could be the heart, could be any part of the body, so that he or she becomes a kind of a cyborg and therefore starting to behave like a robot. These are eventualities that I think we will see at the end of the day if you are not careful or if you don't understand very much what technology is all about, particularly information technology and the rest of it. So as we talk about the 4IR, what bugs me is basically where do we place all this in our discussion? So far, I think we have got 2 council meetings. This discussion has not somehow rather come out. We also talk about the confines of economics, not the robot-like humans or the human-like robots, as it were, in this particular context. Now, this robot-like humans is said to be manifested perhaps no more than 20 years from now in the 2050, according to some prediction. And that's about just 2 decades away. And until and unless we understand where we are heading, this could serve a problem for us. And this goes back to this very central idea of what algorithm is all about. An algorithm, I think you know, is a set of rules that gives you an input and bring an output. I think it is as complicated as can be, the one that I'm trying to demonstrate on the left side. But at the end of the day, what is more bothering for me is algorithm can be biased if trained on a biased data. Hence, we talk about big data and the rest of it, and we do not know what is the worth of this data, who verifies this data, whether it will be on our side or it will be on the other side. And these are research that have been taken by the University of Helsinki. When we talk about algorithm and the data that you're dealing with, it depends on who writes the algorithm, what sort of data input that you use, and what sort of data output you will get. That will determine at the end of the day what sort of human person we will be. And that could be, quote unquote, one way of putting decolonization in a new, very subtle way into the world that is not, amicable to those people who write the algorithm. Now, there are a number of examples that I can give you, but let's look at this paper that was written by Shakir, who is now working with a company called DeepMind. And he talked about decolonial theory as a social technical foresight in artificial intelligence. I happened to access this particular paper, which is difficult to read, but very, very insightful if you go and try to make a sense out of it. I'll pick a paragraph from this. He said the ongoing advances in artificial intelligence among the technological advances will reshape modern society and its cultural relationship, while the design and deployment of the system, let me get rid of this first, continually adapt holds a promise of far-reaching positive change. They simultaneously pose significant risks, especially to already vulnerable people, and that's people like us in the third world mainly. Values and power are central to this discussion. Where have we gone when we talk about IR, when we talk about all this new technology? What is the vulnerability? What is the risk that we are going to face is something that I think we have underestimated in many of our discussion. And he goes on by saying, the years ahead will usher a new wave of scientific breakthrough and technologies driven by AI research, making it incumbent upon AI communities to strengthen social contract to ethical foresight and the multiplicity of intellectual perspective available to us, ultimately supporting future technologies that enable greater well-being with a goal of beneficence and justice for all. So it depends on how you actually understand this. Where does it bring us in the context of artificial intelligence, algorithm, and the rest of it? But as what we can see today, just reading by the headlines, you begin to see that it is not all rose. Yeah, this is an article taken just last year. A biased medical algorithm favored white people for healthcare programs in United States of America, where the blacks, where the colored are marginalized because of the kind of algorithm written by a certain group of people, in this case, the whites. It's biased to them, and therefore, indirectly, sometimes unintentionally marginalize people who do not belong to that thought process or do not belong to that cultural values, and so on and so forth. And certainly, Malaysians and Muslims who are not white will probably be disadvantaged, not only the blacks, as it were. There's also then another, this is from another university, I think California, which talks about biased algorithm exacerbate racial inequality in healthcare. Again, as we talk about Black Lives Matters and all the things that we are seeing unfolding now, including the use of vaccine, the distribution of vaccine, the whole idea of vaccine nationalism, appetite, and so on and so forth, this will have a direct implication to us if we don't understand what artificial is all about, what technology is all about, and where we actually are inherently disadvantaged because of the kind of algorithm that we use, because of the kind of science that we adopt, and it puts us in a state where we actually become more vulnerable than the people. So the discussion that we hear today on vaccines, whether it is true or not, we are not sure, but certainly given this kind of biasness, given these kinds of issues that is talked about maybe at the intellectual level rather than scientific level, rather than the level of the general public, will make us very much aware of where we are heading and how we need to mend some of these issues. Now, it is not only the question of healthcare, but also the question of the human being themselves. Last year, International Women's Year, how can algorithm be sexist? Yeah. And it says here, two centuries from the example of algorithm have the ability to push us back decades in gender parity, explained this particular researcher from University of College Dublin, who is part of a project to prevent artificial intelligence algorithm from learning gender bias. So we talk about racial bias, there's also gender bias now coming in. And they can exacerbate toxic masculinity and the attitude we have been fighting for decades in society. So what we have earned in terms of equality, in terms of justice, in terms of equity, what have you, could be overturned almost overnight if the algorithm that we are subjected to perhaps advocate a different kind of thinking, knowingly or unknowingly, purposefully or otherwise. And that could be another route of a colonialism coming in a very subtle way, where we look at technology as a savior for the future. It may not be indeed in this particular context, right? So this one I'm not too sure, but I do read some of the article which says bias in machine-supported decision cannot be eliminated. It is almost inherent in that. It's almost, to me, like the education system, where you have a system that's already inbuilt with it. The whole works of colonialism, our mind became polluted by it, although we're independent physically or national-wise, but in our mind, we still carry the flag of the national colonial masters within our head. And in that sense, I think it cannot be eliminated. And as we move and work more with technology and almost part and parcel of our life, then it becomes part and parcel our living standards and also our thinking. So those are the few things that begins to bug me when we talk about colonialism in a very different form. No more the hard power, but of course the soft power that our young children are being exposed without them knowing what is the real truth as far as technology is concerned. So I will summarize with a few works that has been taken, and these as early as last year. Researchers say popular depiction of intelligent machines are mainly white. They argue people of color are being erased from the depiction of the future, and certainly that includes us and the Muslim Ummah in general. The team say this needs to be challenged This is where the decolonization part comes in, whether it's Islamization or otherwise, so that we could create a more balanced, a more just society. And I'm not sure whether we are ready for this at this moment in time. Most depictions were white. The team of researchers found, saying that this risk create a racially homogeneous workforce of technologies building machines with an inbuilt bias. And this inbuilt bias is the one that people like us or people like me who are not well versed in technology will have to pay the price. Perhaps Fauzan can enlighten us a little bit on this. Last but not least, the whiteness of artificial intelligence, because it comes from the West. We talk about Western dominance. Now the whiteness becomes more I think dangerous in a way after Donald Trump and his team remove people of color from the way humanity thinks about its technology enhanced future, they argued. University of Cambridge expert suggests current portrayal of stereotypes about AI risk create a racially homogeneous workforce of expiring technologies, creating machines with bias baked into their algorithm. The scientists say cultural depiction of AI as white need to be challenged. And I want to underline this, and I hope this is what the seminar is all about. How do you challenge this? How do you argue this? And how do you counter-propose from the Islamic dimension in terms of algorithm? Who are the Muslims who are writing this algorithm anyway that will replace the algorithm that we are now complaining that is going to sideline us? Yeah. And do not offer post-racial future, but rather one from which people of color are simply erased. Yeah. If that is not real enough, we just had a discussion in the Academy Science about this flower Rafflesia. I'm sure most of you know, the biggest flower. And this is supposed to be discovered by the West, although it is our local flower. But here there is one scientist who actually have worked on this and actually has given also their proposal to the Western sort of publication that looks in Rafflesia, but his paper was rejected. And he later on find out that the Rafflesia that he talked about was exactly what he proposes, but it was rejected because he said this: our so-called molecular biologists are mere technicians supplying algorithm. We have no part in developing and supplying materials to the Western scientists in return for being listed as co-author. To reach the top, we have to master theories, question concepts, provide explanation, and make sense, shape new theories, and compete for intellectual leadership. We cannot compete on the world stage because we suffer from a huge inferiority complex. Westerners in the West do not have such a complex. So I guess I will stop there. I think I would have laid out the issue that we are now at the risk of being colonized again to a different means, because we have got this complexity that believes everything comes from the West is the real truth, and we have no means to compete or to challenge them at any level at all. So on that note, I would like to stop. Thank you very much for your kind attention. Sorry if I missed the point, the topic altogether, but that's a concern that I've got, and I hope we can pay due attention to it. Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi ta'ala wabarakatuh. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Tansri, for your thought-provoking speech. Alhamdulillah, we have benefited a lot, but we will have question and answer session at the end. In every webinar, when you address the audience, you come up with new ideas, which are very, very useful to not only our community, but for the entire Muslim Ummah. So with this, we move on to our panelist, Tansri Professor Muhammad Kamal Hassan. Born in 1942, Professor Emeritus Muhammad Kamal Hassan obtained his BA honors from University of Malaya in 1966 and his MA, MPhil, and PhD from Columbia University in New York in 1970, 1973, and 1976, respectively. He was appointed as the third rector of the International Islamic University in Malaysia and served as first holder of the Malaysia Chair for Islam in Southeast Asia at the Center for Muslim-Christian Understanding, Georgetown University, Washington, D.C. from 1997 to 1999, where he taught 2 postgraduate courses. His career as an academic and administrator in IIUM began in 1983 and officially ended in 2017. However, he has been appointed by the Rector, Chancellor Professor DZULKIFLI, as an honorary advisor to the Center for Islamization, CENTRIS, and continues thereby to continue intellectually and academically towards the betterment of IIUM staff and students. With this very brief biodata, may I respectfully call upon Chancellor Professor Dr. Muhammad Kamal Hassan to share his thoughts on the subject. فليتفضل Chancellor مشكورا. Chancellor, Prof. I think there is a problem of connection, maybe. Chancellor, Prof, are you with us?
His name is not on the list, Tamim.
He joined in the beginning and he sent me the message. I'm waiting in front of it.
Maybe something.
Okay, let me see. If this is the case, can we move on to the next speaker to save our time? Prof. Dr. Anis Ahmad also is trying to join, and he has been communicating with me through WhatsApp that he is not able to connect.
We see his visual is here.
Yeah.
Prof. Anis, can you hear?
Yes, I can hear you.
Yeah,
Now
then you can present. Yeah.
Prof, Alhamdulillah, we have Professor Anis. I think we go by him now. Alhamdulillah, we have Professor Anis with us. Professor Dr. Anis Ahmad is an outstanding Islamic scholar. He specializes in Islamic jurisprudence and da'wah. He is meritorious professor of comparative ethics and religion and founder, Vice-Chancellor of Riphah International University, Islamabad, Pakistan, 2003 till date. He has previously held senior academic positions as Dean Faculty of Islamic Revealed Knowledge and Human Sciences, International Islamic University, Malaysia, Dean Faculty of Social Sciences, Founder, Dean of Faculty of Usuluddin and Director General of Dawah Academy of the International Islamic University. He also served as Vice President, International Islamic University, Islamabad. He is Editor-in-Chief, Islam and the West, a scholarly journal published from Islamabad since 1997. He has taught at national and international universities, including the Appalachian State University, North Carolina, and Temple University, Pennsylvania, USA, Lanzhou University, China, International Islamic University, Malaysia, National Defense University, Islamabad, Staff College and Civil Services Academics, Foreign Services Academy, Islamabad, and International Islamic University of Islamabad and Malaysia. He was awarded University Fellowship by University Science Malaysia in 2012. He has been a keynote speaker at international conferences, seminars, and workshops globally. He has published more than 90 research papers on socio-political and educational issues. He has contributed articles in the Oxford Encyclopedia of Islamic World, New York, and London, Encyclopedia of Islamic Economics, London, UK, and Encyclopedia of Islam, Turkey, the Muslim World Book Review, Leicester, UK. His latest books include Jinnah's Islamic Vision of Pakistan, 2021, Al-Fatiha, a Thematic Study, 2021, Issues in Islamic Society and State, edited 2019 in UK, Gender, Law, and Society in Islam, Islamabad. These are some of his credentials. With this brief note, may I respectfully call upon Professor Dr. Anis Ahmed to share his thoughts on the subject matter. Thank you very much, Prof. فليتفضل.
جزاك الله خير. أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. الحمد لله والصلاة والسلام على خاتم الأنبياء. رب اشرح لي صدري ويسر لي أمري واحلل عقدة من لساني يفقهوا قولي. I am highly honored to be invited in this ISTAC webinar, and I feel very much privileged to listen to my colleagues, more knowledgeable and more senior in their academic positions. And I'll be really honored to see all of them on a screen as well, which I miss very much, because even although I'm in Pakistan, still I feel I have some roots in Malaysia, and I feel more comfortable when I'm around my Malaysian brothers and sisters. So to begin with, my discussion will be very brief, and I will try to be as non-professional, using simple language as possible, so we can first understand what is the issue. To understand the issue, I think we must understand the mind of the colonizer as reflected in the academic writings coming from the West. The colonizer, when it went to Africa and Asia particularly, which are our concern right now, went with a very well-developed plan. And that plan was to make best use of the natural resources of these continents, and at the same time, let natives be suppressed with political force as well as intellectual force. For that, a project was developed, how to de-link them from their own culture. And that delinking was done by way of introducing Romanized language, because they thought that in this way they can run their newspapers in a better way. Romanization of language was first step, and that actually delinked the people from their own culture. Their intellectual works, which were in the script, Javi, for example, here, or Persian or Nastaliq or Urdu script in our subcontinent, in all those areas, and Turkey same, wherever they were having these efforts of secularization. So first thing was to change the script, and they're dealing them. Then to use all kind of overt and overt approaches. In the overt approaches, the definitely use of power and political system. But in the hidden approaches, education was the main tool. Education changed the mindset, worldview, concept of the society, concept of state, everything was influenced by that. However, the Muslim world, since the fall of Khilafah, felt they need some kind of revival. Now, to have this revival, we find emergence of scholars who provided their own programs. Among those were notable persons, Allama Iqbal, Maulana Maududi, Sayyid Qutb and others later on. And all these were efforts to reawaken Muslim world. But when this phenomena appeared, then the colonizer again tried to keep its impact, and for that the term which was used was technology. So it was no more just secularization, it was technology. And we were told that technology is neutral, it has no values. A gun is a gun, a machine is a machine. But essentially, this was a misstatement. Technology has its own ethics, religion, and morality, which was never discussed, which was never tried to be unveiled. Anyhow, the colonization which has been going on for so many years, and the response of Muslims, the way it has been understood, can be very well seen in some writings. I'll just read a small passage by one of the Western scholars. To escape enemy, Muslims have but one choice. For modernization requires westernization. Islam does not offer an alternative way to modernization. Secularism cannot be avoided. Modern sciences and technology require an absorption of the thought process which accompany them. So too with political institutions, because content must be emulated no less than form. The predominance of the Western civilization must be acknowledged so as to learn from it. European languages and Western educational literature do encourage free thinking and easy living. Only when Muslims explicitly accept the Western model will they be in a position to technicalize and then to develop. This is the very well-known Western writer Daniel Pipes. And he tells us very frankly the mind of the colonizer. Unless technology, secularity, and the presupposition of technology are fully absorbed, then they think that Muslims cannot grow. And unfortunately, this has become the dominant trend of the Muslim rulers all over the world, bureaucrats all over the world, because they are trained and educated in Western universities or Westernized universities in their own countries. Now, the challenges that it has brought, first and foremost, in my view, is epistemic colonization, where the concept of knowledge has been given from the Western empirical approach, where utilitarianism is the basis, where materialism is the basis, secularity is a part of faith. So epistemic colonization is one area that needs to be fully understood. Second is what I mentioned a while ago, technological colonization, that all technology, even transfer of technology, means those values that come with technology to be entrenched in Muslim world. And then an axiological colonization where values and culture are to be completely transformed. If young people are meeting together, then they should compete in their branded clothes from Europe. They should use branded ideas in their chats, in their discussions. All those topics which are discussed by teens have to be discussed. And that has led to relativization of ethics, although a claim is made that we are living in a global world where Western values must be universalized. Globalization means that the whole world should no more think about the conventional values or their own values, but they should think about what is the best practice. And best practice means what is done in Europe or in America, which leads us to a Eurocentric order which they want. And quite often Muslim scholars are in this vicious circle of even using all those terms which are borrowed from the West, even to interpret Islam. Muslim responses, as we know very well, there are certain persons who have rejected completely anything coming from the West, and they think that even the language will affect their faith, so they call it language of kuffar. The other are integrationists who want to integrate, and there is the main problem. Integrate what? Integrate Islamic values with a system which is based on other values without de-educating people of values which are foreign. Third are the assimilationists who want to assimilate, who want to have a kind of a mixture. And all these have led to the main problem: how should we respond? In very brief words, the movement of Islamization, which started in North America and before that by some Muslim scholars elsewhere, but the recent one is what we can document from 1972 onwards, when the AMSS was founded in the US and Canada, and when we started holding various specialized groups of political scientists, economists, psychologists, historians, and so on and so forth, and ask them to think how we can build those disciplines on Islamic grounds. I can recall as founding Secretary General of AMSS in 1972, and then later as president, we conducted hundreds of meetings, and still I think we have not been able to achieve the target. We plan to have universities own this concept, and some universities owned it, and try to implement partially or sometimes fully the agenda of how we can Islamize. But then the main problem was, what do we mean by Islamization? Is it just a matter of blending some Islamic terminologies, or it's a matter of building from scratch a new world vision, a new concept of man, a new concept of knowledge, a new concept of society? And all that requires a synergy, a coordination of minds and bodies together. It's not only scholars' work, it's at the same time responsibility of academic administrators. They have to join in the same process, and only then it can be continued. So what we need to do is, first and foremost, try to understand the problems in Islamization of knowledge. And perhaps it is time that instead of calling it Islamization of knowledge, we should think of a term which can be even satisfactory for those mindsets which are assimilative, which want to assimilate, which want to integrate. We have to review both concepts and come up with perhaps an approach where we say that we are essentially ethicalizing social sciences. And ethicalization means those ethical norms or axioms which have universality but not having regional roots, not having just Asian values, European values, Southeast Asian values, but universal values. And there we try to come up with a process of systematic elimination. What are ultimately those universal values? I always refer in that context to the approach of objectives of Sharia, where they are not just objectives of Sharia, but they are objectives of humanity. Humanity cannot survive without genealogical continuity. Humanity cannot survive without an ideology, without a faith, without a conviction, even that may be of atheism, but it has a conception. Therefore, it has an ideology. And similarly, humanity cannot survive without having a concept of security and safety and welfare of society. And all those are the objectives of Sharia: welfare of people, continuity of human genealogy, protection of faith and culture and values. So we have to use a new language, and that new language should not change the content. Content must remain the same, but a new language needs to be improvised without being apologetic. It's not a matter of since Islam has been demonized, therefore we use less the term Islam. No, it's not the matter. My concern is that social sciences are not a monopoly of Muslims. If we want to export our concept, then we cannot export Islamized sociology to Oxford. But we can always present an sociology which is ethicalized, a sociology based on certain universal ethical principles. And those principles definitely are to be drawn from the Islamic sources, particularly the wider scheme of objectives that need to be fully comprehended and reflected in that. So I believe that we have entered a phase where without offering apologies for what we have done for over 50 years now, and without being apologetic about Islam, we need to use a language that can convey our meaning in more effective way, and perhaps which can be more agreeable to even those Muslims who are fully westernized. Even for them, ethical values carry some weight. So we need to perhaps change our strategy, academic strategy. It's not political, academic strategy of how we achieve our objective of revitalizing or regenerating a whole system of thought which is concerned about welfare of humanity, which is concerned about the maslaha not only amma of Muslims, but of the whole insaniya. So I think this approach needs to be further crystallized, and our institutions like ISTAC and IIUM and other institutions, they need to take this project on a very serious basis and with a time frame. So within shortest possible time, we are able to address in different disciplines how we can introduce or build on ethical basis the whole discipline. This is very briefly what I thought I should share with my very respectable colleagues. I'm very thankful to ISTAC again, and I'm highly honored to listen to my very dear brother Professor Kamal and our dear brother DATO OSMAN and others who are joining us. I think it is a treat for me to listen to them even on this webinar and exchange our views on this very pertinent topic. I thank you all for this beautiful seminar being arranged, and I hope our deliberations will be inshallah useful towards the movement of Islamization of knowledge. May Allah bless you.
Thank you very much, Prof. Dr. Anis Ahmed, for your presentation. Alhamdulillah, we have heard a lot from you after a few years. You have rightly said that we need to really use a new language, but the content can be the previous one, because we need to address the pertinent issues facing not only the Muslim community, but also the humanity at large. Inshallah, please, Prof. Ani, stay with us until the end, because we have many people willing to ask questions from different panelists. With this, our next speaker is Chancellor Professor Muhammad Kamal Hassan, and I'm sorry that we missed him before because of some connection problem. Let me briefly introduce Prof. Kamal, who was born in 1942. Professor Kamal obtained his BA from University of Malaya in 1966, and his MA, MPhil, and PhD from Columbia University in New York in 1970, 1973, and 1976, respectively. Professor Kamal was appointed as the third rector of the International Islamic University, Malaysia, and served as first holder of the Malaysia Chair for Islam in Southeast Asia at the Center for Muslim-Christian Understanding, Georgetown University, Washington, D.C. from 1997-1999, where he taught 2 postgraduate courses. His career as an academic and administrator in IIUM began in 1983 and officially ended in 2017. However, he has been appointed by the current rector of IIUM, Chancellor Prof. DZULKIFLI, as an honorary advisor to the Center for Islamization, CENTRIS, and continues to contribute intellectually and academically towards the betterment of IIUM staff and students. With this very brief information, may I respectfully call upon Chancellor Professor Muhammad Kamal Hassan to share his thoughts on the subject. فليتفضل Prof.
السلام عليكم ورحمة الله وبركاته.
وعليكم السلام Prof.
بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. الحمد لله الذي هدانا لهذا وما كنا لنهتدي لولا أن هدانا الله، والصلاة والسلام على أشرف الأنبياء والمرسلين سيدنا محمد وعلى آله وصحبه أجمعين. سبحانك لا علم لنا إلا ما علمتنا إنك أنت العليم الحكيم، ولا حول ولا قوة إلا بالله العلي العظيم. Thank you very much, Professor Tamim. Alhamdulillah, by the grace of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, I'm able to join this webinar this afternoon. I'm indeed very honored and privileged indeed to be in this panel because it is participated by Yang Berhormat Datuk Saifuddin, the Minister for Information, of course, the Rector of the University, Tan Sri Zul, my old friend, Prof. Anis Ahmad. I'm very, very happy to see you, Alhamdulillah. And of course, Prof. Osman Bakar and Prof. Marikan, and brothers and sisters, Alhamdulillah. Once again, I thank Allah for it is by His grace and mercy that I'm able to be with you this afternoon. The topic before me is very challenging, and I will try my best to present within 20, 25, or at the most 30 minutes with the permission of the moderator. First, I think some definitions on decolonization and also Islamization or Islamization. And on decolonization, one of the definitions is the process of deconstructing colonial ideologies of the superiority and privilege of Western thought and approaches. Decolonization involves dismantling structures that perpetuate the status quo and addressing unbalanced power dynamics. Then another definition is decolonization refers to the undoing of colonial rule over subordinate countries, but it has taken on a wider meaning as a freeing of minds from colonial ideology. I think this is what Prof. Anis is very concerned about, and also what our Tan Sri Rector had mentioned earlier. Although colonialism with the hard power is no more around, but colonialism with soft power is still very much around, and AI is feared by our Rector as another platform for neo-colonization. And therefore the discourse on decolonization is not only pertinent, it is necessary, and I would submit it is one of the methods of Islamization. One of the processes of Islamization is decolonization. I'll come to that at the end when I define the meaning of Islamization. In one of the discussions on colonization, the scholar raised this question: are bodies of knowledge distorted? And I think we have, through Islamization, have also addressed this issue of the distortion in the conception of knowledge. Because knowledge, as we understand it from the worldview of Tawheed, worldview of Quran, involves, first of all, revealed knowledge, the knowledge of God based on revelation. And then there is the acquired human knowledge. And it is the acquired human knowledge which is problematic, not the divine knowledge. But the post-enlightenment conception of knowledge confines it to the rationally acquired knowledge, and leaves aside or marginalizes revelation as a source of knowledge. And that is a very, very serious epistemological crisis. The concept of knowledge has been distorted, and the research methodology also could be distorted by the dominant tradition. And this scholar argues that methodology is derived from Western Enlightenment assumptions about individualism, the separation of mind from body, and rationalism. And this tradition puts positivists or pseudo scientific approaches on top when it comes to carrying out research. Whereas the indigenous communities in say, New Zealand or Papua New Guinea and other young nations in the Pacific view knowledge differently. So there is a scope for the indigenization of human knowledge, which I would also consider as part of the Islamization, if it can be, controlled in a way so that indigenization does not involve the legitimization of false beliefs from the worldview of Tawheed. Okay, then I go to a UNESCO regional advisor speech in 2012. He was a regional advisor on social and human sciences in Asia and the Pacific, Daryl Macher, and he was, hoping that the social sciences knowledge would expand in the ex-colonial territories and would serve a good purpose. But then he was also concerned about the Western paradigm of knowledge, of science, and of social sciences. He writes here, to a great extent, the social sciences grew out of the 17th century European Enlightenment, where new ideas about religion, reason, humanity, and society were merged into a fairly coherent worldview that stressed human rights, individualism, and constitutionalism. And then the World Report on Social Sciences, issued by UNESCO, says that the predominant Western construction of what knowledge is is problematic. And he says we need to value all forms of knowledge, meaning knowledge derived from revealed sources, which to us is very, very important, because there you have the real truth with a capital T and not just a small t. The social facts and the social realities comprise a small t, but the big T is provided by religion, by revelation. And the big T is lost in the new paradigm of post-enlightenment science and social sciences. Okay, then I go to the journal Nature, in discussing traces of colonialism, not in the social sciences, but in the sciences, in the natural sciences, traces of colonialism in the natural sciences. And this is from the well-known journal Nature. The journal defines these calls for decolonizing of science as a movement to eliminate or at least mitigate the disproportionate legacy of European thought and culture in education. The main objective is the equitable generation of research sources, along with continuing investments in local scientific talent and infrastructure. And we have heard from Tan Sri Zul earlier, this new ghost of colonialism in the guise of white supremacism and fascism and racism. And this has led one of the African social scientists to say that that decolonization of the social sciences in Africa is impossible. And that is because of the legacy of colonialism is so powerful, and the fact that you still have and the up and coming African social scientists lean heavily on the powerful paradigm of per diemization, not decolonization, but per diem, how much they are being paid for their research. So he calls it the paradigm, a powerful paradigm of per diemization. And this is a type of consulting, the negative consequences of which are related to, okay, it's quite long, so I will not read that. One final quotation on the decolonization issue is, and this is still with us and will continue for perhaps decades in the future, decolonization of the mind. Matthews Hendricks, I guess from South Africa, writes this. Decolonizing the mind means deconstructing the thoughts, preferences, and values that derive from a colonial way of thinking. This is a process that inevitably leads to more fundamental questions. Decolonizing the mind involves deconstructing hierarchies that favor the West in practically every facet of life. And we have heard about the bias algorithm now favoring whites vis-a-vis blacks and colored people. So AI is going to be another tool of neo-colonization or neo-technological imperialism. And he says, finally, primarily deconstructing the colonial mind means deconstructing the binaries of desirable and undesirable, attractive and unattractive, civilized and uncivilized for the BIPOC, that is for the blacks, for the indigenous and people of color around the world, and in a variety of sectors are working consciously or unconsciously to do this. So one of the challenges of decolonization is to break these binaries of desirable and undesirable, attractive, unattractive, civilized, uncivilized, progressive, unprogressive, modern, conservative, which are binaries constructed by the enlightened West, and decolonization has to deconstruct that. Okay, now I come to the other discourse. Another decolonizing discourse is Islamization or Islamization of knowledge. But first, let me give some definitions, because this is one of the problems, I think, resulting from the issue of Islamization is our definition of the term. I would like to maintain that if we define it in a particular way, we need not do away with it, because I think it is justifiable. And for instance, I would say that although the prophets, the messengers of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala have never used the term Islamization or Aslama or Islamiyya al-ulum, but every messenger of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, when they were brought to human history, actually engaged in Islamization. Now, what do you mean by that? Is it forcing people to believe in one God? No, it is arguing rationally that there is one God, and even arguing with the Christian theology about Trinity, because Christians maintain that they believe in one God. But it is not Muslims who say that they don't believe in one God. It is the Quran. Allah says those who believe in Trinity, then they have actually denied the one true God. And those who believe in God is one of three have also denied the unicity of God. So that theological reform and revolution is part of Islamization. Then they also, all these messengers also constructed civilizations, and the civilizations were in a way a manifestation of the Islamization of human knowledge guided by divine revelation. So I do not think why people should really feel objectionable towards the use of Islamization given that kind of interpretation. There was a time when there was a Christianization of the world. There was a time when Islam was spreading in different parts of the world, and the word used was Islamization or Islamization. But the Islamization that we're talking about is not the imperial expansion of Islam, neither it is the military expansion of Islam or the political expansion of Islam. It is the intellectual reform of the human mind. It is an intellectual agenda, intellectual discourse against secularization, dehumanization, and secular humanization of knowledge. Anyway, I will have more to speak on that, inshallah. So let me go to the definition first. I provide here three meanings of Islamization, of the term Islamization, and I'm not including in that meaning the conversion of people to Islam, which is the primary meaning of Islamization in modern history. When they talk of Islamization of the Malay world, Islamization of the Indo-Pakistan subcontinent, they meant people were converted to Islam. But in my meanings of Islamization, I exclude that because that's not our concern. So the first meaning is a process of being in compliance or conformity or harmony with the worldview or teachings or principles or norms or values or perspectives of Islam. So the first one is a process of being in compliance, or you might say a process of being in conformity with the teachings of Islam, to make it short. Second, meaning of Islamization. It is a process of applying or implementing or incorporating the tenets or laws or teachings or principles or norms or values or perspective of Islam. This is more having to do with, let's say, the implementation of the Sharia in Muslim countries. And I would like to focus, Islamization is pertinent to Muslim countries. I am not speaking, and I'm not going to advocate Islamization in non-Muslim countries. All right, for that we can think of some other terminologies like Prof. Anis suggested, ethicalization and so on. But when it comes to Muslim countries, we need to remind our ruling elites, we need to remind our power holders, we need to remind our decision makers that they have to comply with the teachings of Islam. And the short term for that is Islamization. We are not forcing it on them. They're already Muslims, but they are not implementing the teachings of the Quran and the Sunnah in their societies. In fact, they are not only in the lizard's hole, they don't want to come out of the lizard's hole. They find it so comfortable in the lizard's hole that Prof. Malik Badri referred to the dilemma of Muslim psychologists in a lizard's hole. So my contention is that our political leaders, our decision makers, our ruling elites have been, following the secular model adjusted to indigenous or national needs, and not really implementing the commandments of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala in the full sense of the word. So that is a second meaning. So that is more applicable, applicable to Muslim countries, Muslim nations. And third is more general. And this could be inclusivistic, it also be exclusivistic. A process of enjoining that which is good and right, al-ma'ruf, and prohibiting that which is bad or wrong, al-munkar. So it's a process of implementing al-amru bil-ma'ruf wal-nahyu anil munkar. Well, if people have problems with that, no problem. But this is what Allah requires of the believers to do, wherever they may be, in whatever capacity, either individually, collectively, socially, or as a nation. So in other words, and there are many good things. Al-ma'ruf refers to that which is good or right, and there are many good things that we can learn from the West and from non-Muslim countries. So al-amru bil-ma'ruf also means we are propagating and teaching what is good in other nations, from China, from India, from Germany, from Japan. There's so many good things in the technological dimensions, in particular, which we need to follow, even in the social dimensions. For instance, the tradition of queuing up. We are learning it now because of the pandemic, but the Japanese had made it their way of life a long time ago, and cleanliness and respect for the elders have become part of the Japanese culture. So how do we enculture those values in Muslim countries? So that's part of Amar Ma'ruf Nahi Munkar. But there are also munkar in Muslim countries. There are a lot of munkarat Muslim countries, and there are a lot of munkarat in Western countries. But in Western countries, it is beyond our power to do anything. So we are not addressing that. We are addressing the situation in Muslim countries. So proceeding from that understanding, or those three meanings of Islamization, and excluding all the other meanings which Westerners are afraid of: radical Islam, political Islam, what else? Islamic State and all those things are not included in my definitions, in my meanings. Okay, now, so Islamization, now we come to Islamization of human knowledge, because social sciences is part of human knowledge. And of course, there are a lot of things to be done with the social sciences. It covers so many things, but people tend to forget that economics is part of social sciences, law is part of social sciences, education is part of social sciences. And in these three areas, we have made, Islamization has made advances, improvements and advances in the area of law. For instance, in Malaysia, the Sharia law has been, progressing quite well. And then we have also economics, Islamic banking, Islamic financial institutions are becoming more and more popular. And that is thanks to Islamization. And so we can, inshallah, maybe in the near future, some American banks would go for the Islamic instruments, and maybe they will not use the word Islamization of their banks, but they are doing it now. Australia and America and so on. But so I would still maintain that we need to defend and justify the use of the term Islamization, although in general there's a need for a new language to engage the world. Yes, I agree, but certain things cannot be reduced any further. Otherwise, we are being guilty of reductionism. So to me, Islamization is the lowest point that I can go to make it easy for people to understand, but based on the three meanings that we give, and not on the meanings that the radical Muslims give. So then I would prioritize, number one, unity and integration of knowledge, the oneness of knowledge, and then the integration of knowledge. In fact, integration is one of the methods of Islamization, just as decolonization is one of the methods of Islamization. So I do not put it as convergence or divergence. Decolonization is a part of Islamization. It's not an issue of convergence or divergence, but there may be certain parts in decolonization that we need to be cautious about if they contradict Islamic teachings. If they do not contradict, then decolonization is a very important part of Islamization. So also integration. Some people are making a choice between integration or Islamization. To me, it is a false choice. Integration is another process of Islamization. Integration is another process of Islamization, because Islamization of human knowledge is a process, is an ascending process, ascending from the lowest, that is, say, the lowest category of Islamization, and then it goes to the medium category of Islamization, and then going to the high category of Islamization, and the highest category of Islamization. The highest category, by the way, from what we understand, is when you can come up with a new body of knowledge built upon the epistemology of Tawheed, built upon the worldview of Tawheed. You construct a new knowledge. Like now, say, IT is a new knowledge. And we need to have that. And that is the highest level of Islamization. But some scholars may be at the lower level of Islamization. And what they can do is integration. What they can do is comparison. What they can do is harmonization. They're not yet able to come out with a new body of knowledge because of the level of maturity and experience dealing with knowledge construction. Okay, so number three is harmonization of divine knowledge. This is another process of Islamization. And this is what has been happening in IIUM since Datuk Saifuddin was there at the Kuliah of Laws. Tan Sri Ahmad Ibrahim, Almarhum, was not going for Islamization of law. He was going for harmonization of civil law with Sharia law. And thanks to him, Alhamdulillah, the position of Sharia law over the last, say, 2 decades has been elevated in Malaysia. Okay, so harmonization is important, and some aspects of conventional economics could also be perhaps harmonized with Islamic economics. Because in economics, we are ahead of, let's say, sociology. We're still not far up in anthropology, sociology, political science, human geography. Probably we are not that far up. But when it comes to law, education, economics, we're quite high, given the last 4 or 5 decades of development. But we still have a long way to go. We still have a long way to go. And number 4 is what Prof. Osman Bakar has also been advocating, that is synthesis, which is another process of Islamization. Synthesization of Tawhidic sciences with the, I would say, with the compatible aspect of secular sciences. In the case of Prof. Osman, he has been working with a group of scientists in the world who are not atheists. They are theistic scientists. They are scientists who believe in God. They may or may not agree with Darwinian evolutionism. Some may not agree, but some may agree. Some may even be believing in deism. It doesn't matter. So they believe in God. So there is a possibility of convergence with disciplines which are based upon belief in God, as compared to disciplines which are based upon atheism or materialism or naturalism or positivism. Okay, so synthesis is another method of Islamization, which Prof. Osman Bakar has been advocating. And then number 5 is decolonization. We have been talking about it. So decolonization is another method of Islamization. Deconstruction is also under decolonization. That is also deconstructionism, of course, started with the postmodernists. But we can use that method of deconstruction without the postmodernist metaphysical presuppositions, because the postmodernist presupposition or metaphysical assumption is still secularism or atheism or nihilism. But in our case, it is monotheism or strict monotheism or uncompromising monotheism of Tawheed, which can be the epistemological basis of deconstruction of contemporary knowledge. And then the highest level of Islamic method of Islamization, of reconstruction. So we are able to reconstruct human sciences and social sciences and humanities on the basis of the worldview of Tawheed, but with its own systems, its own structure, theories, and so on. Now, I will come to what we have described in our policy on Islamization. I would like to share this with my colleagues from outside of IIUM so that they understand when we talk about Islamization, what do we mean? Because I know that in UK, our brothers with Triple IT in UK, led by Dr. Zia Sardar, is saying that Islamization was okay at a certain time when Al-Marhum Ismail Al-Faruqi was using it as part of the Islamic intellectual discourse. But now that discourse is no longer relevant. We need to move on to integration. Now, I will agree with him if it is applied to the Western context, to the Islamophobic West context, or to the Islamophobic China context, or Islamophobic Japan context. Yes, because however much you try to justify the peaceful meaning of Islam, the non-violent meaning, they still cannot remove the bias against Islam. So no point talking about Islamization. I will agree with Zia and IIIT of UK, but I will not agree with IIIT of Malaysia or East Asia to remove the term Islamization and use only integration. Integration is one of the modes of Islamization. It cannot replace the Amar Ma'ruf Nahi Munkar of Islamization. Integration is, you can integrate things which are compatible. You cannot integrate kufur and Islam. You cannot integrate munkar with ma'ruf, halal and haram. You cannot. So yes, by all means use integration, but don't say we will only use this. Then you are already confining yourself. You declare losing the battle before the fight. So the fight has yet to start. That is real work in building disciplines on the basis of Tawheed, which we are doing in law, economics, education, alhamdulillah. Law, economics, education, we are doing very well, alhamdulillah. But other areas, sociology has a long way to go. Psychology we could converge with psychology, especially we are talking about the positive psychology school of thought, because psychology has about 7 schools of thought, beginning with, psychoanalysis of Freud, and then all the way down to humanistic psychology and so on. And now you have positive psychology, which begins to accommodate spiritual values, not yet admitting the soul, but I think hopefully they will one day admit that there is a soul, but they admit there is something called spirituality. So there are spiritual ways of overcoming depression, anxiety, and suicidal tendencies, and schizophrenia, bipolarism, and all that. So some brothers who are specializing in psychology and specializing in positive psychology could benefit from the spiritual teachings of the Quran and the Sunnah. And that is what I think some people are trying to do. I think Dr. Abdullah Rothman in UK, a student of Malik Badri, is, I think, moving in that direction of convergence of Western psychology with Islamic spiritual values. Okay, then I come to some of the policy statements, and I will end with that, Mr. Chairman. Policy number 6 or 5.6 in the IIUM policies on Islamization, which many people do not know, and some people know but forget. So number 1 is the mission of Islamization of human knowledge is an alternative paradigm of constructing and developing knowledge and education in accordance with the worldview, fundamental principles, ethical values, and norms of Islam. Okay, that's number 1. Number 2, this alternative paradigm based on the theology, ontology, epistemology, axiology, and ethics of Tawheed. So ethics, yes, ethicality, fine, Prof. Anis, but there is axiology, there is epistemology, there is ontology, there is cosmology. So why confine only to ethics? Maybe that's the only common ground. Okay, but from that common ground, we can move on to cosmology and ontology and so on. And then this, so there has to be a critical perspective. This critical perspective shall be applied to those philosophical foundations, theoretical assumptions, and ethical implications of the natural, the physical, and applied sciences, and also the social sciences, insofar, and please underline this, insofar as they are imbued with presuppositions, assumptions, values, norms, and perspectives which are contrary to the Islamic worldview. Those things which are not contrary, not contradicting, not opposing, not negating, then we will accept them. So this concept of Islamization is inclusivistic. We have the other concept, which is exclusivistic. And that is not what we are trying to do. And that is why IIUM so far, based on this inclusivistic notion of, and also we're not forcing people to behave in one particular way. Different kuliahs have decided to follow different methods, all fine, because we believe Islamization is a complex process of ascending to the very top. And to reach the very top will take time. So we will have to allow for people to have different procedures, different methods, different approaches of reaching that highest goal, inshallah. So then finally, in the policy, we maintain that Islamization of human knowledge must begin with Islamization of the self. Now, this again has to start with the Muslim. We're not talking about the non-Muslim. We're talking about the Muslim economists, the Muslim sociologists, the Muslim psychologists. He has to start with Islamization of his self, tazkiyatun nafs. The Quran uses the term tazkiyah, purification. Maybe Prof. Anis, maybe another terminology is purification of knowledge, or tazkiyah of knowledge. Tazkiyah of knowledge, not Islamization of knowledge, tazkiyah of knowledge, because this is one of the missions of the Prophet. Yuzakkihim wa yu'allimuhumul kitaba wal hikmah. Yuzakkihim. So the prophets undertake the process of tazkiyah of society and tazkiyah of civilization. So tazkiyah of maybe that's better. I mean, less what do you call it, invasive, or less controversial maybe. So then we move to Islamization of knowledge, which is the product of the mind of the scholar. So the scholar has to be Islamicized first, and then the knowledge. And in IIUM, we always keep these two together. We cannot say, oh, you just start with Islamization of knowledge, forget about yourself. No, you must begin with the self, and then the self has to proceed from at least 4 levels of spiritual development. The lowest level is the level of Islam. The second level is level of Iman. The third level is level of Ihsan. And the fourth is taqwa and mahabbah of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So the individual Muslim has to go through these 4 levels of Islamicity in the process of trying to produce Islamized knowledge. Okay, then I come to the last issue, convergence, or policy. This is policy number 7 in the book. Islamization of human knowledge does not mean that IIUM aims at imposing Islam or its values and norms upon non-Muslims, nor does it mean that IIUM is opposed to or refuses to acknowledge the much needed and useful scientific, intellectual, and technological contributions and achievements of non-Muslim individuals, institutions, organizations, countries, and civilizations. And I always like to quote to my students China, because China is a huge country, huge population, huge Muslim, and they have some native indigenous technology, which are really very, very good, that can be used by Muslims. Okay, then I say that on the contrary, and this is the last sentence, Prof. Tamim, on the contrary, IIUM shall cooperate or collaborate with all educational institutions, Muslim or non-Muslim, in the promotion of sound knowledge development and holistic education, as long as it is in harmony with a vision and mission for the benefit and well-being of the whole of mankind. And we end with the prophetic saying, wisdom is a lost property of the believer. Wherever he or she finds it, he or she has a right to it. Al-hikmah dallatul mu'min anna wajadaha fahuwa ahaqqu biha. Thank you very much, brothers and sisters. Sorry for taking a long time. أقول قولي هذا وأستغفر الله لي ولكم. والسلام عليكم ورحمة الله وبركاته.
Thank you very much, Prof. Tan Sri Kamal Hassan, for your comprehensive presentation, which includes some of the important policy statements with regard to Islamization of human knowledge in the context of IIUM. Prof, as you said at the end, we in ISTAC and also in IIUM are now moving forward for all kinds of collaboration with external agencies so that we can impart our mission to other people as well. With this, we move on to our next panelist, Professor DATO Usman BAKAR. Usman BAKAR, a doctorate in philosophy from Temple University, Philadelphia, USA, is currently a holder of Al-Ghazali Chair of Epistemology and Civilizational Studies and Renewal at ISTAC-IIUM. He is also Emeritus Professor in Philosophy of Science at University of Malaya. He was formerly Distinguished Professor and Director of Sultan Umar Ali Saifuddin Center for Islamic Studies, University Brunei Darussalam. Professor Usman was also formerly Malaysia Chair of Islam in Southeast Asia at the Prince Talal Al-Walid Center for Muslim Christian Understanding, Georgetown University, Washington, D.C., and Deputy Vice-Chancellor Academic and Research at University of Malaya. Professor Usman is the author and editor of 40 books and more than 300 articles on various aspects of Islamic thought and civilization, particularly Islamic science and philosophy, in which he is a leading authority. His most well-known books are Classification of Knowledge in Islam, Tawheed and Science, and his latest books are titled Al-Farabi, Life, Works and Significance, published in 2018, and Colonialism in the Malay Archipelago, Civilizational Encounters in 2020. He has been named among the 500 most influential Muslims in the world since 2019. He was made a Dato in 1994 by the Sultan of Pahang and a Dato by the King in 2000. With this brief biodata, may I respectfully invite Dato Professor Usman BAKAR to deliver his presentation. فليتفضل Dato.
Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Alhamdulillahi Rabbil Alamin. Wassalatu wassalamu ala ashrafil anbiya wa mursalin Sayyidina Muhammadin wa ala alihi wa sahbihi ajma'in. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh, and a very good afternoon. Brother Professor Tamim, the moderator of this webinar, fellow panelists, Tan Sri Zulkifli, Tan Sri Kamal, Professor Anis. It's nice to see you, Professor Anis, and also Professor Murad. Inshallah, in 20 minutes, inshallah, allotted to me, I will try to discuss a few aspects of the topic, given that the topic is quite broad. There are two major intellectual agendas in the Muslim and developing countries that have been going on since the end of colonial rule. The two agendas or projects are decolonization and Islamization. Actually, the seeds of these two projects, the roots of this project, had been planted much earlier during the colonial rule, because certainly the Muslim intellectuals, Muslim scholars did not stand by idly in the face of colonialism. They reacted against it, fought back, and tried to find solutions to the challenge. But for the purpose of discussion, just talk about these two projects since the end of colonial rule. That means that's more than 50 years ago. Now, with regard to the two terms, Prof. Kamal has already defined them, so there's no need to define again. So thank you, Prof. Kamal. That makes it easier for us who comes after you. The only one thing, I agree with Professor Kamal that from the Muslim perspective, decolonization should really be treated as an integral part of Islamization. However, for this purpose, for my discussion today, I treat the two as distinct, although overlapping, precisely because there are developing countries and there are formerly colonized countries that are not Muslim majority. So I treat them to accept. I'm more interested actually in my presentation not in the two agendas as a kind of parallel to each other or intersecting, but I'm interested more in the intersection of decolonization and Islamization. So it is some highlights of this intersection that I would like to present, given the shortage of time. Most Muslim countries are categorized as developing, and most so-called developing countries are Muslim. Thus, under the widely used criteria of categorization of developing, there is a general identification of Muslim with developing. This is an issue in social science. We may want to review this issue of categorization and its criteria, and to suggest new ideas on the global social order by coming up with new classifications of countries that truly reflect the rich cultural diversity of the world, rather than that are based on dubious or disputable assumptions. There's one possibility. If we are revisiting, revisiting this whole issue, perhaps we need to think anew on this issue. Or we feel we are quite happy with the present categorization, and we then argue that all we need to do is just to improve on our socio-economic performance so that we will transform ourselves from developing into developed countries. But the reality, we know what the reality is. Now, what the implication should be, in other words, I mentioned two possibilities. So whichever one we take, the implication should be, both in the short and the long term, need to be studied. The study could be undertaken under both decolonization and Islamization. But my view is that the so-called developing countries should not continue to be trapped in an ill-defined global economic agenda that was imposed on them, including this division between developing and developed. Existing forms of relation between developing and developed countries need to be reviewed and redefined. Social scientists have an important intellectual role to play in redefining these relations. So this is the first point that I would like to emphasize. Next, there is the identification of Muslim countries with colonized territories. Most Muslim countries were once ruled by the West, and most formerly colonized territories are Muslim. So this particular identification means that, generally speaking, Muslim countries have undergone both Westernization and de-Islamization. Emphasize de-Islamization. In other words, for Muslim countries, the inevitable consequences of colonialism were Westernization and de-Islamization. The two consequences were visible both at the level of ideas and at the level of institutions. If we bear in mind that European colonialism had civilizational goals, both written and unwritten, namely the unchallenged global reign of the newly installed new value system of modern Western civilization, then we will not be surprised to see the impact of this colonialism on Muslim countries reaching civilizational proportions. Of course, the majority of Muslims fought back against Westernization and de-Islamization. According to Ali Mazrui, rahimahullah, one of Africa's most famous scholars in modern times, who was a leading authority on colonialism, if we are looking for a clash of civilizations in the more recent past in human history, then that historical moment was none other than during Western colonial rule. Mazrui portrayed it as the clash between Islamic and modern Western civilizations, which was essentially a clash between two civilizational value systems. This clash has been studied by a good number of social scientists, but further studies on it in both depth and breadth are needed. Since colonialism had resulted in de-Islamization, it is only logical that decolonization, understood as the undoing of colonialism, would involve some form of Islamization. So we come to this point, we come to this very important point, namely the historical justification of Islamization. In order to appreciate the significance of contemporary Islamization of knowledge, not only in the social sciences, but also in many other disciplines, it is important to first understand the significance of de-Islamization during colonial rule. We understand de-Islamization to mean the deliberate attempts by colonial authorities to remove Islamic elements from the indigenous societal institutions, and more importantly, to deliberately erase these elements from the Muslim mind or consciousness, particularly through education. Perhaps the most visible de-Islamization misdeeds happen in the field of law. This high visibility of de-Islamization in the field of law, which is higher than in any other field, is hardly surprising given the centrality of law in society and civilization. This is especially true in the case of Islamic society, where the revealed law or Sharia is believed to be the final embodiment of the divine will to serve as complete guide to human life on earth, individual and collective. All laws of human origin are supposed to be based on or to be extensions of the revealed law. And it is by virtue of that conceptual extension that all laws in Islam are viewed as religious in character. What colonial de-Islamization has done was to perform a surgical operation on the body of the Sharia that was one total whole, by amputating its parts that Western doctors of law considered as not religious in the light of their own understanding of religion. Let me illustrate this colonial de-Islamization in the domain of law with a concrete historical example: British Malaya. I owe this illustration to Al-Irham Professor Ahmad Ibrahim, already referred to by Professor Kamal, a noted Malaysian legal authority in both Western and Islamic laws, who was an academic at the University of Malaya in the 1970s, and then from the 90s onward at IIUM. he narrated the colonial de-Islamization of law, or colonial de-Islamization in law in British Malaya as follows. This is my summary of what was written. Before British rule, the laws in the Malay states were Islamic. That is those of the Sharia. The Sharia that was then practiced in these states covered all branches of law as befitting its true status as an integral legal system, including family, land, criminal, civil, and evidence and procedural laws. With the coming of British rule, the process of de-Islamization in law began. De-Islamization of law, which in practical terms meant the shrinking of the Sharia, was achieved through two principal ways. First, through treaties between the Malay rulers and the British colonial authorities that required the former to receive advice from the latter except in matters of religion and Malay customs. The Malay rulers were pressured to sign the treaties, which favored the British. The British catch in the treaties was the word religion. In Ahmad Ibrahim's own words, quote, "The word religion of Islam has been given a narrow interpretation, and religion is understood in the same sense as in Christianity. With this interpretation, the British were able to influence the field of law in Malaysia, which they considered as having no connection with religion," end of quote. Following this narrow interpretation of religion, the British were able to reduce the Sharia under the jurisdiction of the Malay rulers to family and inheritance laws and matters pertaining to religious rituals. The British advised the Malay rulers to introduce new written laws to replace the Sharia laws in domains that colonial authorities no longer considered as religious. The new written laws were, of course, based on English laws, either directly or indirectly. Now, the second channel of de-Islamization of indigenous laws was the sentences passed by the judges. The British authorities advised the Malay rulers to establish courts and appoint judges. In practice, all these judges were British, who were well versed with English laws. But whenever they encountered problems during court trial proceedings that could not be resolved through the newly written laws, they often resorted to English laws, because these laws were the only ones they knew and understood. Thus said Ahmad Ibrahim, quote, "Through these two channels, namely new laws and court sentences by judges, English laws were comprehensively introduced into the legal system in the Malay states. Eventually, it could be said that English laws succeeded in practically replacing the whole of Islamic laws as state laws," end of quote. So now we could visualize the intersection of decolonization and Islamization in one of the most important domains in the social sciences. There is the narrative of de-Islamization of law in British Malaya that I presented earlier is rather well known to many people of the older generation. But many young people do not know it. It would be better for them, it would be good for them to know it and have it as an integral part of their evolving consciousness. However, for academics in the social sciences, they need to go beyond the simple acceptance of this historical narrative. They need to reflect on the deeper issues underlying the colonial phenomena of de-Islamization of law in Muslim countries, so that we learn something, historical lessons from this phenomena. Now, only through such a reflection would they be able to clearly see the intersection of decolonization and Islamization. Quite clearly, both decolonization and Islamization may be viewed as legitimate responses to the Islamization of law that necessarily overlap, since issues of religion were closely intertwined with colonial policies. What are the deeper issues underlying the colonial de-Islamization of the Sharia? Not only in British Malaya, but more generally, in all colonized Muslim lands. I would identify three of these deeper issues: British secularism, Christian theology, and British imperialism. Taking British Malaya as a case study, we are persuaded to believe that all the three elements contributed to the de-Islamization of the Sharia. Since the British colonial legacy is still with us, it means that we have not yet successfully resolved the challenges that arose from colonial de-Islamization. In other words, both our decolonization and Islamization projects have not yet achieved their goals, if indeed these goals have been well defined and articulated. Let me explain what I mean by the three deeper issues. First, British secularism. British secularism was an underlying issue in the De-Islamization of law because it fortified in the British consciousness the domain that separated the religious and the secular, thereby influencing their attitudes in a negative way towards the religiosity of the Sharia in the Malay states. The weakening of Christian faith in Europe, generally, during the colonial period, not just in Britain, in Europe generally, during the colonial period, partly due to the influence of science, the whole of science, helped empower British secularism. While Christians had no objections to the religious secular lines of separation, Muslims reacted with fury to the imposition of this dichotomous belief on their thought, since this was foreign to their religious consciousness. Moreover, as a result of the application of British secularism to their legal system, they lost their wholesome Sharia that is yet to be recovered. The other issue is Christian theology. Christian theology was an underlying issue in the De-Islamization of law, since not only it stood by the religious secular division imposed by the British colonial authorities on traditional Malay legal system, but it also facilitated the imposition by virtue of the fact that Christianity had no sacred law in its history in the post-Pauline era, that's the post-St. Paul. Christianity did not and still does not appreciate the centrality of the Sharia as the sacred law in Islam. Christians readily admit that theology is central to their life and thought. To be appreciative of Islam, all they need to do is to realize that, significant-wise, what theology is to Christians is what the Sharia is to Muslims. A Christian attack on the Sharia is comparable or equivalent to a Muslim attack on Christian theology. British imperialism is the third issue. British imperialism is an underlying issue of the Islamization of law because it does not tolerate legal pluralism, let alone the idea of permitting another legal system to challenge the reign and supremacy of English law. Therefore, it was the role of colonial policy to ensure that indigenous laws, to the extent that these were allowed to be practiced, must be subordinated to the English legal system. De-Islamization and the shrinking of the Sharia was just a logical consequence of the British imperial policy on indigenous laws in the colonies. In my view, these three underlying issues have not yet been resolved. They need to be further articulated in contemporary studies on decolonization and Islamization, viewed as responses to colonialism and its legacies. One I would like to say, the rest of my presentation is about, if previously I've talked about basically the intersection, in a sense, the convergence, the convergence of decolonization and Islamization. Here, I would like to say more about the differences, or rather, what separate the two. Of course, assuming that we are not only looking from the view of Islamization from the Muslim point of view, but from the more general view that includes also the view of non-Muslims who happen to be colonized. Now, apart from historical justification of Islamization, we also have its epistemological justification. As far as Islamization of knowledge is concerned, the epistemological justification is the most important because it is essentially concerned with issues of knowledge per se. In the case of the social sciences, the epistemological issues are primarily concerned with the nature and characteristics of society in the singular, society in the singular, and of societies in the plural. Concerned with the functional assumptions about human societies, concerned with the methods of study of societies, concerned with the purposes of social sciences. These are the core issues that need to be addressed in the social sciences. When we are speaking of the epistemological justification of Islamization in the social sciences, we have to investigate whether or not the core issues in question and related issues have to be, and related issues have been addressed. We have to check, we have to investigate whether these issues have been addressed in the light of Islamic ideas and practices. Prof. Kamal has already done quite a bit on this, but what I just want to point out is that, in other words, as I said, I'm saying that we are talking here about Islamization of the social sciences, which is yet to be achieved. What more to be achieved at the highest level of Islamization is still an unfinished business. But what I would like to conclude here is, from the Islamic point of view, in other words, I'm appealing now, and I'll say something about the intersection between decolonization and Islamization from the perspective of Islam. In other words, my concern is with our scholars, Muslim scholars who are dealing with the subject of decolonization. Well, clearly there are differences in several respects between Islamization and decolonization, understood as intellectual projects. For one thing, the scopes of the intellectual concerns, of the two intellectual concerns, is are not the same. Islamization of the social sciences is clearly a broader and more comprehensive, because it is concerned not only with colonialism and its legacies, but also with pre- and post-colonial social phenomena and legacies. For example, we often refer to Ibn Khaldun, who came before the colonial era, but we can learn many things from him, from his work in our study of the phenomena during colonial times and the post-colonial events. But I think, in my view, decolonization as a project of Muslim scholars would gain more, would benefit more, if they were to see themselves as also as an aspect of Islamization. In a sense, the two complement. Islamization has universal perspectives. Generally, it has particular perspective, but the perspective is universal. Decolonization is indigenous based. Because it is, as Prof. Kamal used the word deconstruction, because it is a deconstruction, which is easier thing to do than construction. Sorry to scholars of decolonization, but this is my sensibility. Therefore, we find that when we look at the literature on Islamization and decolonization, I could see that the Islamization, in a sense, is better defined than the project of decolonization. in terms of foundation, in terms of methodology, in terms of objectives, goals, Islamization stands far above decolonization. And precisely because decolonization is more of an intent, of an intention. Decolonization is an intention to deconstruct, to undo colonialism. But having that intention, what is the proposed methodology to run? All right. If decolonization is about the undoing of colonialism, what is exactly the methods? What are the methods of undoing that? Well, I think yes, it is true that both Islamization and decolonization are still ongoing, but I think, to close my presentation, I would call that in the Muslim perspective, for the two perhaps to get to merge, or to use a popular saying, all this while proponents of decolonization have made friends with proponents of Islamization. Perhaps now decolonization should get married to Islamization so that they can gain more from that marriage, inshallah. Alhamdulillah. Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh.
Okay. Thank you very much, Dr. Prof. Osman Bakar, for your thought-provoking presentation. Hopefully the marriage will take place, inshallah. So we have our next speaker, Professor Dr. Ahmad Murad Marikan. He is a professor of social and intellectual history, International Institute of Islamic Thought and Civilization, International Islamic University, Malaysia. He is a senior fellow at the Center for Southeast Asia Research and Hub, De La Salle University, Manila, the Philippines. Before joining ISTAC, he was with the Center for Policy Research and International Studies, University Science Malaysia, Pulau Pinang, from 2016 to 2019, and subsequently appointed as visiting professor at USM. He was an adjunct professor at the National Academy of Arts, Culture and Heritage in Kuala Lumpur. He was a visiting professor at Universitas Andalas in West Sumatra in 2006 and 2010 at the Faculty of Social and Political Science. He has a PhD in the History and Philosophy of Science from University of Malaya and baccalaureates in Political Science, University of Minnesota, and Journalism from Institute Technology, Mara. He also obtained a Master of Arts Mass Communication from the School of Journalism and Mass Communication, Minnesota. He is the president of the Malaysian Journalism Teachers Society, a vice president of the Pacific Asia Communication Association, and a life member of the Malaysia Historical Society. He has been interviewed by the national and international media, including the New Straits Times, The Star, Sin Chiu Daily, Astro Awani, Radio Singapura, Berita Harian Singapura, Padang Express, BTTV, Bukit Tinggi, West Sumatra, Iranian National News Agency, IRNA, and the Islamic Republic of Iran Broadcasting, Reuters London, and the Associated Press, Mexico City. His academic and research interests include journalism and media studies, social science and intellectual history. He has written more than 16 books on journalism and media studies and social and intellectual history. Some of his recent books are Batu Uban, Sejarah Awal Pulau Pinang, 2015. In other words, Ideas on Journalism, Social Science and Society, 2017. Views from Pulau Pinang, Countering Modern Orientalism and Policy Perspectives, co-author in 2018, and Colonialism in the Malay Archipelago, Civilizational Encounters, co-author 2020. His forthcoming book is titled Decolonizing Penang, 2021. He is a columnist for the Daily New Straits Times, the weekly Malacca Hari Ini, and the National Opinion Journal, Dewan Masyarak. With this, may I respectfully call upon Professor Dato Ahmad Murad American to deliver his presentation. The floor is yours, Prof.
Thank you, Professor Tamim. Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh.
Assalamu warahmatullahi wabarakatuh.
Tan Sri Zul, fellow panelists and participants. I definitely would not want to repeat what has been said by earlier panelists. But what I have in mind are 4 points which are distinct but related. One is decolonization as a movement in alternative knowledge. Second is colonial science and Malay identity. Third is enlightenment or European social science. And fourth, I think this way we have to move forward, revising the curriculum, revamping the social science curriculum. But before I move on, I'd like to make some reference to law, because I think a number of panelists have mentioned the role of law and refusal to look at law as pluralistic. In my forthcoming book, which was mentioned by Professor Tamim, Decolonizing Penang, I made a case and an argument. I brought in a moral and legal argument on the status of the island before the coming of the British. In many of the narratives, and even in the court cases between 1810 to 1814 in Penang, after the establishment of the Charter of Justice in 1806, the judges, although they know that the island was populated, they still, in a legal sense, made the judgment that the island was terra nudis. This implies one thing. This implies that only the colonial perspective and epistemology of law is accepted in the history and the historiography of the island. In other words, before the British came, there was no law. It was assumed that there was no law, there was no people. But what happened was Ahmad Ibrahim made a statement in his writing, saying that the law, the lex loci in Pulau Pinang is adat Temenggung, modified by Islamic law. And this is where I think it's an important point in which how we negotiate between coloniality and decoloniality. So in regard to Pulau Pinang, it implies how we establish and define history, how we move history outside of secular European time. In other words, the discipline of history is one of the major areas and one of the major domains that define our consciousness and our identity. And we look at history as how it is conceptualized and implemented in the modern period. We will find that history will bias and would marginalize the non-European peoples. History has been seen to be Eurocentric. History has been seen to be periodized within the context of European philosophy, within the context of European progress and time. And therefore, if we were to study history as such, and not disentangle the processes of history, we would not be able to find our own history. We would not be able to define ourselves. We would discover that we are invisible in time. So this is what I have, in a sense, implied in my book, Decolonizing Penang, with regard to positing that in looking at Penang from a non-Eurocentric perspective, I have established that before 1786, that year that didn't happen. There was no agreement, no treaty. The lex loci is Islamic law. Adat Temenggung. In other words, there was law, there is law, and that law comes from the Sultan of Kedah. So this one example of how we have to look at decolonization, and not just in looking at it in any discipline, but we have to look into particular disciplines, sociology, history, and philosophy. One problem in colonialism and one problem in how we consume colonialism is the problem of periodization. Periodization in Western philosophy is different from Islamic philosophy. But unfortunately, we have taken the template of Western periodization in looking into our philosophy, in looking into our consciousness, in studying our history. As such, for example, descriptions like the golden age of Islam, Malacca as the golden age, medieval period, dark ages. These are distortions. We can use the word medieval Islam, for example, but would they provide us with the proper significance and the proper consciousness of the life and the spirit at the time? So this is one aspect I think that we need to look into. But here I'm going to turn to my first point, which is looking into decolonization as part of a larger movement calling for an alternative knowledge in the modern world. We're looking into modern history here. We're looking into the period post-World War II. And in the post-World War II period, there are movements which can be bifurcated into two. One having political ramifications, the other having epistemological ramifications. The political ramifications can be seen easily, emancipation of nation states, nationalism, and so on. The creation of new nations, hence the creation of a new identity, new knowledge, new forms of knowledge of oneself, which happens which has happened over the last 60, 70 years in Asian countries, in Africa, and so on. But what has not been emphasized so much until in recent decades, over the last 2 decades or 3 decades, are the epistemological problems. And here we have to look into the process of decolonization as part of the movement and, for example, countering Eurocentrism, to counter a Eurocentric view of knowledge, and indigenization of knowledge, looking into what we have, what the originality of our being. And then you have the endogenization as opposed to the exogenous form of knowledge. Endogenization is different but related to indigenization. And then we have autonomous social science, which lead Professor Alatas and his son is advocating. We have also de-Westernization, apart from Islamization, and apart from other movements like de-schooling society and the pedagogy of the oppressed. All these are responses toward a dominant or against a dominant knowledge system. Again, when you talk about science, there's not one science, but a number of sciences. There's not one social science, but perhaps a number of social sciences. What we are responding to under the condition of one homogeneous, monolithic social science. That's why we have to see this process as efforts at creating alternative knowledge. I don't see this in its finality. I see these as processes over the last 60 years or 70 years. And these processes of creating alternative knowledge systems is happening and will happen and will continue to happen in terms of processes at reconciling, for example, what we are deliberating now between Islamization and decolonization, and de-Westernization and indigenization. In Malaysia, for example, there are many strands and many movements. There's a movement toward indigenization of knowledge. This is essentially coming from the Malay-speaking intellectuals, Malay-speaking scholars who have looked into the origins of knowledge within the Malay context, within the Malay cosmology, and this epistemology, this indigenization of knowledge movement is quite contained to those who read and speak Bahasa Melayu. It has not, unfortunately, moved out. Those who talk about Islamization would be mainly those from this university, this community. Those who talk about decolonization would still mainly be from the English-speaking sphere, some from the younger generation who would want knowledge in the social sciences and in the sciences to move out of the colonial space. What had happened over the decades is that our epistemological space has been invaded by what we call colonial knowledge. When the Europeans came, and here I'm talking about in the 18th, 19th century, they established and they classified, they created categories which can be identified as colonial knowledge. They established Leiden, they established SOAS in 1906 to study and collect information, to collect data about the colonized people. They even divide identities. And this is important to me because being on the wrong side of identity, having a wrong consciousness of who we are, creates a wrong direction of where we're going. And this comes to my second point with regard to how knowledge, colonial science have defined the Malay. We look at over the decades, the Malay in Malaysia believe that the Malays originated from Yunnan. Okay? Although over the last 2 decades, there have been many theories, 2 theories in particular, debunking the first one, and there's also the out of Taiwan theory, the Sundaland theory. All these theories are used and consumed by society, by Malay society especially, to establish identity and ethnicity based on structures of knowledge. But the belief early on that the Malay was inherit the culture and the ethnicity from Yunnan has been around since early 1900 and is still around now. Many believe that the Malays come from Yunnan. Now, this is a result of colonial science. Robert Hein Gulden, a member of the Vienna Circle, who developed this hypothesis in the late 1800 and early 1900, to say that based on the ages, the existence of X, he made this empirical conclusion because of the existence of the similar artifact in the peninsula, and the existence is similar to the ones in Yunnan. Therefore, the Malays must have come from Yunnan. And this has created a long-time belief until now. This is the work of colonial science, and colonial science has been instrumental in much of how they determine how the non-Europeans, how the colonized believe in who they are and their consciousness. My third point is what has been mentioned, but I'd like to mention this, that the social science that we are consuming now is derived from the problem of Europe, the problem of modern Europe in the 1700, from the Renaissance, the Reformation, and the Enlightenment. It is the child of the European Enlightenment. It is unfortunately a distinct form of thought. Unfortunate for us, because it is developed as a distinct form of thought, social science, and in particular sociology, about modern society. Now, we're not saying that we are not modern, but still we have to interrogate and we have to define what modernity is and how it came to Malaya, for example, how it came to the Malay world. And quite surprising to many, it should not be actually, that modernity, apart from coming through the vehicle of colonialism, also came from Cairo, which was a seat of both Islamic learning and the seat of, or rather the congregation of European colonial culture, the Cairene culture that was brought in to Malaysia and parts of Indonesia through the kaum muda. So again, it is a distinct form of modern thought developed in the centers in Paris, London, Edinburgh, and Amsterdam in the 18th century, upheld by the modern French philosophers, rooted in the 16th, 17th centuries, Hobbes, Bacon, and Locke, structured in the idea of men as autonomous, men as a center of the universe, and contextualized in the problems of a secularized Europe at the time. And it found its most effective expression in the 18th century. So the basis for this would be science and freedom vis-a-vis human nature. And here I give you some of the features that have been embedded in the Enlightenment social science. And what we have now is essentially that. Over the last 50 years, we have not tinctured with the corpus that we have. Now, what are these features? One of which is reason, the primacy of reason. In the primacy of reason is primarily European, not non-European cultures and rationality. Second is empiricism, based on empirical facts. Now, as social scientists and as scholars, we have to know that facts are also invented. Before the 16th century, facts was not categorized as a fact, but facts as a category is a modern invention. In other words, if you look at present social science, to them, in the corpus of and the epistemology of modern social science, the prophets and the angels are not facts. They're not rendered as facts, but to us they are. And then another feature is science, key to expanding of all human knowledge. Again, that relegates revealed knowledge into a different dimension. Progress, and another problem with regard to the idea of development and the idea of evolution, social evolution. And much of the discussion and progress is structured in the social sciences, looking at human psyche moving from one state to another. Rostow's theory of human development, for example. And then, of course, freedom and human rights and secularism. And some say virulent anti-clericalism, being wanted to be free from religious orthodoxy and opposition to traditional religious authority. So when you look at, and this comes to my fourth point and final point, when you look at modern social science, the corpus was formalized sometime in the 1800s. I mean, I look at the Chicago School as a measurement for the classic divisions of the social sciences, psychology, sociology, anthropology, economics, and political science. And these and other areas which came in the interim period, including law, accountancy, and so on. This began to serve the global economy. This began to serve the global system. And even when we talk about Islamic economics, it's not integral to the economy. It's part of the dominant economic system. So how do we do it? I think that one of the things that we have to do is to look into the social science curriculum. We've talked about categories, concepts, we've debated about institutions, but the curriculum is important. The curriculum spells out to universities that the highest level of knowledge producing institution on redefining social science. In the West, over the last 20 years, there have been movements at, for example, revamping economics. They do it for a different reason compared to us. They do it because they were against crash capitalism and the problem of the environment, the problem of suppression, the problem of injustice. But we do it for other reasons. So again, the principal areas, especially sociology, as the mother or the queen of the social sciences, and here, for example, of course, people may think of Ibn Khaldun. One thing that we have to be conscious that Ibn Khaldun is not a proto-sociologist. Ibn Khaldun is a modern sociologist. In other words, we have to factor Ibn Khaldun as a sociologist, as one of the earliest modern sociologists, and not Henry Saint-Simon, Voltaire, and other French philosophers. So if you relegate scholars in the Muslim realm as proto-scholars in the area, then we will not do justice to the sciences that we are studying in. So figures like Ibn Khaldun, Al-Farabi, and Al-Biruni, again, we will not put them neatly into the specific disciplines of sociology and anthropology. I don't like to do that. I think that again, territoriality is a function that is dysfunctional in many ways. So we have to start. Our scholars have to after 50 years of social science, the epistemology, the corpus, and the value, and on top of that, we are consuming a value-free social science, which is antithetical to our being. I think we need to restructure the social sciences. The International Islamic University, we have to restructure its kuliah, real and human sciences. We have to restructure the departments and the components, and perhaps merge some of these disciplines. Because, for example, a simple example is one cannot solve a political problem by studying political science. Social economics and social sociology, and of course history. We need to tackle the discipline, and in tackling the discipline, we have to look into the curriculum, we have to look into the syllabus, we have to look into the text that we expose our students to. And these texts are important. Why they're called texts? Because they're canons. Originally, these texts are canons, and these canons are ones that determine the kind of passage that a student go through. So I would suggest my final point is that we look into the curriculum of the social sciences, not only in this university, but in other universities in Malaysia and in other parts of the world. And this is one way whereby we construct and we influence and we create a consciousness among scholars and students who would inherit that after they graduate. Salam. Salam. Yeah, very good.
Okay. Thank you very much, Professor Dr. Ahmad Mohrad Barikan, for your presentation on decolonization, with a special reference to some of the issues which are very pertinent, including a suggestion that we should really review the social sciences curriculum, not only in our university, but also in other universities. Inshallah, we will take note of that. We have, alhamdulillah, come to an end of our presentation. Since our Honorable Minister, Dato Saifuddin Abdullah, has been following the program since the beginning, may I respectfully request him to say a few words about our webinar and give us some suggestions about how we move forward, inshallah, in the context of the Malaysian scenario. Falyatafaddal Dato Saifuddin.
Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. Professor Tamim, all of my learned brothers, including Prof. Anis, how are you? It has been a long time. I bumped into Prof. Kamal. The last time was at a wedding, not his wedding, someone's wedding. Tan Sri Zul in his normal black shirt, been following Prof. Osman. I must congratulate Prof. Ahmad Mohrad on your forthcoming book. Please be ensured that I should be one of you should mail it to me as soon as it is published. Yeah, let me first and foremost congratulate ISTAC and IIUM for organizing this webinar on decolonization and Islamization. Whenever we speak on decolonization, I think Prof. Osman will understand that I always remember my roots where I was school at for my secondary school. I'm a product of a colonized system, very much white in the training. But I think I was blessed, and I had the opportunity. On the one hand, I was working at the International Islamic University for 9 years. And even before that, I was with some of the brothers and sisters in our Islamic movement and was introduced to Islamization of Knowledge. I still remember our discussion on the Mecca conference, 1977. And Farouqi's main call for Islamization of knowledge and the resolutions of the Mecca conference, which as a result of it, one of which is the two IIUM, of which we have here Prof. Kamal and Prof. Anis, who were founders of the two IIUM, one in Islamabad and one in Petaling Jaya, to be exact, Prof. Kamal, section 17, Jalan University. And then when I was a deputy minister, I was hijacked by Tan Sri Zul a couple of times to his university at USM. And I was then introduced to this discourse on decolonization. But I believe this is probably one, if not the first time, one of the rare occasions where these two topics were joined together in a seminar, and having all of the great scholars. And I find it very, very enlightening. In one way, it is, I was telling Tan Sri Zul earlier before the webinar start, I like to attend this kind of webinars to refresh my own understanding of things and also to keep me sober as I am now navigating in a world that is very, very challenging indeed. I just have a few points. You know, when I was at the IIUM, and Prof. Kamal will definitely remember this. We were, at that time, I was an officer at the Student Affairs Division, and we were struggling to come up with a training module for student leaders. And at that time, the main reference, what was trending that time, was Stephen Covey. And all of our trainers, even our Muslim brothers, were using Stephen Covey and the other writings from the West. If not because of Hisham Talib, who produced a manual for training for Islamic student leaders or Islamic youth leaders, we would, in the early 80s, we would just have to subscribe to Western write-ups. Unfortunately, in my line of work today, it is still a struggle. I'll give you an example. Professor Zul started with AI, and in the context of the advent of technology. I have my officers with me here attending the webinar too, and I have always been asking, where is our own Kevin Kelly? Kevin Kelly is like a big name in the area of technology, and we have, well, probably we have not found him. Probably he is there somewhere, but he has not written, or his book has not been as popular as the one written by Kevin Kelly. But that is the struggle. When I first came to this ministry, and part of my job is, of course, on information, I said, look, I mean, I was reminded, this is Professor Anis' area of studies, the Dustur ad-Da'wah is the An-Nahli, verse 1 to 5. Ud'u ila sabili rabbika bil hikmah wal mau'izatil hasanah wajadilhum billati hiya ahsan. Fine. Then when you want to operationalize it, then I have this challenge. Where are the you know the contemporary deliberations of this beautiful verse, which we all accept as the Dustur ad-Da'wah, or the pillar of Da'wah. So it is a constant struggle. My third point on technology also, I think, if I may propose that either ISTAC or anyone at all, ISTAC would probably be the most fitting. If we can continue from today's discussion, if we can have a webinar of sorts on the technological advancement, I mean, if I were just to, well, unfortunately, I cannot name certain companies because I'm supposed to be the minister in charge of multimedia and communication. But I'm sure everyone in the webinar will understand who I'm referring to. The 4 big companies, which in a way control data and in some ways connectivity. These are Western companies. They may be Muslims, they may be Muslim engineers who are working in those companies, but I have yet to see that impact that would then tell you we are quite okay. I like the way Prof. Kamal mentioned about the 3 areas where I think IIUM has done a wonderful job in the areas of law, economics, and education. But I think in technology, AI, to be specific, as mentioned by Tan Sri Zul, is something that is still wanting. In social sciences, I mean, my colleagues in governments, not only in Malaysia but also in other countries, when they look at the economic system, sometimes you have to rely to the writings of people like Robert Reich. And when it comes to politics and democracy, you have to rely on works by A.C. Grayling. And this reminds me of another incident when I was much younger and working at IIUM. We were all very happy when Almarhum Malik Badri joined us, because Noraini and Muhammad Jantan, our two counselors, the founding counselors, were also struggling on the methodology of counseling that we were using with our students. So the struggle is still there. I'm not sure whether there's supposed to be a marriage between the decolonization and Islamization, but there have been some advancement. Like I think Malik Badri did a very good job in translating and making Almarhum Abu Zaid al-Baki's book, which was written in the 9th century in Arabic into English and republish it. And I really hope that students of Malik Badri and of course students of the distinguished panel will continue, at least in my line of work, to assist us. So my last point really is, if there is any way that we can be of assistance at all to ISTAC and my brothers here, please, I'm just a phone call away and we will try as much as possible to be of assistance. But I would like to repeat my request if we can do some discussion on the aspects of technology. Thank you. Assalamu alaikum.
Ribuan terima kasih Dato for your excellent remarks. Inshallah, we take note of your suggestion. Also, we will go for one webinar on the subject that you have mentioned, which will be organized by ISTAC. We have, alhamdulillah, come to an end, but we have a Q&A session, and there are several questions. Before we end our session, let me choose some of the relevant questions and see how we can adjust our time. This question was posed by one of our brother called Nuruddin Akbar. He says, some accuse Farooqi's idea of the Islamization of social science as tending to be artificial and not fundamentally changing the current building of Western social science, which is materialistic and Eurocentric. Please explain this issue in more detail. Any of the panelists? Prof. Anis, would you like to respond?
Can you hear me?
Yes, we are hearing, yeah. Prof. Yes.
Yeah. I perhaps feel privileged to be very close to Professor Shahid Ismail Farooqi, and I understand he himself went through the process of what Professor Kamal just mentioned, Islamization of self. When Farooqi began his journey as a nationalist, talking about Uruba, he ended as a Tawhidic prophet of thought. He changed the paradigm completely. And Farooqi's ideas were essentially a combination of what Maududi said in 1960s. In 1960s, he delivered a lecture, which I heard personally, and there he gave a program of reconstruction of social sciences, which Malik Badri referred to in one of his papers, that it is the pioneering effort was done by Maududi in that respect. But the development and Crystallization was done by Farooqi. And Farooqi did it because he was a rebel against Western thought. He was a product of Western thought. I was trained in West also. Professor Kamal was trained there also. But we liberate ourselves from that paradigm. And we try to erect a new structure with Islamic paradigm of knowledge, epistemology. So I don't think it will be just to say that Farooqi was just responding from a Western viewpoint. No, he was totally against Western presuppositions. And that's why his classic work is Tawheed and its implications, where you find how thought can be developed based on the single concept, basic concept Islam has given. And therefore it is a Tawheed-based epistemology, Tawheed-based sociology, Tawheed-based law. Everything is based on the authority of divine revelation and unity in life. Unity in life means only one ethical principle to dominate. Does not mean you can have dual standards. And all philosophies of the world are based on a dualistic approach. Religion and politics, religion and economy do not meet. But Islam provides this Tawhidic approach, and therefore Islamization of social sciences essentially is application of Tawheed in all these disciplines. So a new concept of man, new concept of society, new concept of law. In that sense, definitely Farooqi's contribution will remain predominant for quite some time.
Okay, thank you, Prof. Any other panelists would like to add? If not, I move on to the next question. Is postmodernism a form of decolonization of knowledge? What about postmodernist tendencies such as Feuerband, which states that all knowledge is valid, to reject the hegemonic definition of Western knowledge, including the knowledge that, according to Feuerband, must be accepted is witchcraft, which according to him also needs to be taught in schools in line with science subjects. How do you think about this kind of academic position? May I request Prof. Kamal to answer? Prof. Kamal, can you unmute?
Oh, okay.
Yes, thank you.
Sorry.
Thank you, Prof.
Okay, thank you very much. I was saying that I'm not the most qualified person to answer this question because I've not really studied the thoughts of Feuerband. I know a little bit about Foucault and Derrida, but not Feuerband. And the questioner is mentioning Feuerband, but I think talking about postmodernism in general, is it a form of decolonization? Well, I don't think so. It is a form of demodernization, not decolonization, because to them, knowledge is actually inseparable from power. And this goes back to Bacon's idea that knowledge is power. And postmodernism exposed that. Colonialism disguised it with the setting up of SOAS and other Orientalist centered of learning. And of course, Edward Said has exposed all this, the goals and the objectives of Orientalism. Now, postmodernism is a child of the West. It's a rebel against its own father. The father is Enlightenment modernity, and postmodernism cannot accept that because modernity is defined in a certain way. And because the postmodernists deconstructed modernity. And so the word postmodernism came into being. And so at least with modernity, there are certain fixed, you might say, criteria of knowledge. But with postmodernism, everything becomes relative. And therefore, witchcraft is a form of indigenous knowledge, and it could be justifiable in certain societies. So postmodernists would consider that a valid form of knowledge. So what postmodernism has done is to not to actually, because with Islam there's a hierarchy of knowledge. With modernity, the hierarchy is changed. Science and technology is at the top, theology is at the bottom. In Islam, theology is at the top, science and technology is at the bottom. So hierarchy is there, but the postmodernists do away with all hierarchies. So everything is relative. Everything depends on the individual. So what the individual thinks is right, go ahead. So there's no absolutes anymore. But witchcraft, look from the modern perspective or Islamic perspective, are taboo, and we should not dwell with witchcraft. But postmodernists want to destroy all the absolutes. And so you do not have any more absolute, except the absolutization of human reason. I mean, again, autonomous human reason. So I think, I must say, maybe Dr. Datuk Murad can say more on Feyerabad, but I don't know much about Feyerabad. But postmodernism, to me, is a rebel against its own father. And that is serving a good purpose for us, at least because, you know, these are philosophers, mainly French philosophers, and followed later on by the Americans. But so is a European philosophy undermining European philosophy? That is good, because we cannot go to that kind of depth which these French philosophers could go into. Okay, so that much I can say, but I'm sure others can. Okay, Prof. Osman, Prof. Anis, and Prof. Murad can say more.
Yeah. Okay, thank you, Prof. Prof. Murad, would you like to add? Prof. Murad? Yes, welcome.
Just a note about Feyerabad. Feyerabad is to the person who asked. He was an anarchist. He was a philosopher of science and an anarchist. But towards the end, he recanted. He retracted all the witchcraft and anything that is irrational. So again, I think one has to read to understand. One has to read his latest work, not his works which were written earlier. So he returned. He returned to rationality as such. And on the postmodernism, yes, it's the French pomo. France, you see, France is an epitome of a secular state. It is an ethnic state. It is an ethnographic state, also with together with Britain to some extent. But the French has defined and determined the practice of Islam in other societies. So this, I think, is also another way of looking at how the tension between the French postmodernists and Islam, one of which was, I think, Gellner and a few others. Although they have, they want to deconstruct knowledge, they want to find another form of knowledge, which is, to me, has a recolonizing impulse. That's the danger. It's a recolonizing impulse of the French pomos. So one has to look at the emergence of epistemes in the modern period as a transient existence, but nevertheless dangerous for non-Western epistemology. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Dr. Prof. This question comes from one of our professors.
Hello?
Yes, Tansri? Yes, Dr. Please, go ahead.
Yes.
Dr. Prof.
Yes, Prof. I have two observations about postmodernism. Actually, postmodernism is just a convenient name given to an array of beliefs and opinions. Yeah? There is no such thing. In other words, postmodernism does not have a coherent epistemology because it is an amalgamation. It is a combination of all those people who were or who have been anti-modernism. So the only thing that they have in common is being anti-modernism. Apart from that, do not constitute one coherent whole. I think that is important. That's why if you look at the various views coming from the so-called modernism, you have even views that contradict each other among themselves, precisely because they do not represent one single epistemology, rather than several epistemologies under the name of postmodernism. As I said, it's because anti-modernism. Now, one observation is that, yes, in certain areas, for example, they tend to be moving away from a Eurocentric worldview. Therefore, prepared to accept the validity, for example, of alternative ways of knowing, indigenous ways of knowing, which was rejected by modernism. So there are, in other words, there are certain areas in which they move away from modernism, for example, in the question of the place and role of the alternate epistemologies to the modern one. Now, with regard to Fairbairn, I had criticized him himself in one of my essays with regard to the issue of plurality of methodologies in science. Now, he used the word basically is methodological anarchy. He was in favor of methodological anarchy. Why? Because he did not have that thread, that single thread that could give meaning, could give coherence to different methods. In Islamic science, for example, yes, Islamic science maintain the idea of plurality of methods. It's not simply the empirical method. Other methods are valid, but then there is precisely because of the principle of Tawheed, that again, that emphasized by Professor Anis, it is that principle of Tawheed that enables to integrate all these different methods of knowing into one coherent whole. Postmodernism does not have that, and certainly Fairbairn not. That's why he just used the word anarchy. He admits that there are pluralism, but he cannot make sense how they should be integrated. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Dato. Since our time is very short, this will be the last question. Is the issue of decolonization or Islamization of social sciences the reflection of the crisis in knowledge? If it is true, then shouldn't we try to address this problem from a perspective of epistemology and methodology with a universal angle? Is not the crisis in knowledge a global issue? Any panelist can answer. Prof. Kamal? Prof. Anis, anything? Would you like to answer?
Well, I think, can you hear me?
Yes, Prof.
I think the question is very much appropriate. It's a matter of epistemology. It's a matter of theory of knowledge, understanding of truth and reality, ultimate truth, what are basic assumptions. So Islamization of knowledge is extremely relevant, and the only solution, in my view, which can bring us out of any crisis. Islamic approach is the only approach that provides a convergence point in human personality. Otherwise, you have a split. So the Tawhidi approach of Islam provides that basis, And I'm sure that, as Professor Kamal mentioned, a lot has been done in some areas, but other areas need to be addressed, particularly sociology and psychology. These are the areas where we need to do more researches, and more material should come out of that. I believe that this is a very appropriate step you have taken, and I think you need continuation of this interaction with our participants and panelists in order to further crystallize these aspects and then develop a cohesive methodology where we work together. It's no more a matter of individuals. I think we have to institutionalize this process of Tawhidic approach in our social sciences, and for that ISTAC and other institutions have to work together, share their future plans, distribute work, and move forward, because I believe it's no more a matter of Muslim countries. My concern in the beginning was that Islamization should not be confined to Muslim countries. That's why I'm saying that we can use axiological approach of ethicalization, where it is more openness as compared to Islamization, which people think is only for Muslim countries. No, Islam is for the whole of world. And for that, we cannot tell them to Islamize French law, but we can say ethicalize French law. We cannot say to Puerto Ricans that you Islamize your political system, but we can say bring ethics. So this was the main concern. Otherwise, I am fully in agreement that Islamization process should continue. It's a process, as Professor Kamal said, and in that process, it's not just individuals anymore. It should be institutions now. We should join together.
Okay, thank you, Prof. Anis. Prof. Kamal, would you like to add a bit?
I have nothing to add, Prof. Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you, Prof. I think now we have come to almost an end. It is 5:45. So may I respectfully invite our Honorable Chancery Rector to give his concluding remarks.
Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. I can only express our deepest thanks to everyone who has been involved, and particularly Yang Berhormat Datuk Saifuddin, who has been instrumental in opening more doors. I take your suggestion, Datuk, that we need to look into technology as another area that is emerging. And in fact, in my note, we in fact has been planning to do another one, the understanding of what 5G is all about. I think everybody is jumping on the bandwagon of 5G, but if you read behind the lines, 5G is also not as clear as what it is indicated. So inshallah, to a panel of this nature, we will do this time with the Academy of Science, so that when you talk about, the scientific knowledge and Islamic knowledge, we can probably find a convergence somewhere, because the 5G is not only for us, but nationwide, indeed globally. So let me take this opportunity to thank everybody for deep thoughts. And I hope, as usual, Prof. Tamim, there'll be a documentation of this,
Inshallah,
so that we can use this for further distribution and further, discussion moving ahead. It will not end here. I think there'll be a long way to go, inshallah. So on that note, Ramadan Mubarak, have a good iftar, and hope to see you in the next webinar. I'm sure already the dates are in Professor Tamim's head.
Yes.
I can see it's moving there.
We have on the 25th, inshallah, of May.
Okay. So thank you very much. Wabillahi taufiq wa hidayah. Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi ta'ala wabarakatuh.
So on behalf of ISTAC, I take this opportunity to thank our Honorable Minister, Dato' Saifuddin Abdullah, who has been instrumental in many things. And he has been with us in ISTAC for the last 2-3 years. And we had been encouraged by Dato' Saifuddin's very constructive words. May Allah reward you for your effort. You spent about 3.5 hours with us. Although you are very busy with so many things, So we thank you very much, Dato Saifuddin Abdullah. I also take this opportunity to thank Tansri Rector with his busy schedule. He started the meeting at 9 o'clock and the meeting was going on and going on. I was able to see him only for 2-3 minutes in his office around 1 o'clock, and then he has to finish his prayer, and then he joined our webinar. Thank you, Tansri, for your support. And I also thank Tansri Professor Kamal Hassan for your contributions. And Prof. Kamal has been always supporting our mission, vision, and he has been very much instrumental to achieve the objectives of ISTAC as well as IIUM. Thank you, Prof. Kamal, for your efforts. Thank you, Prof. Dr. Anis. And I was a bit worried in the beginning when you did not get the connection. Alhamdulillah, Dr. Sajjad has sending me the message. We are trying to connect. Alhamdulillah, we got it at the end. Thank you, Prof. Anis, for your effort. Inshallah, we will have another webinar with more time. Thank you, Prof. Dato Uthman Bakar, for your encouraging remarks. Thank you very much, Prof. Murad. And thanks to all the participants, particularly the senior officials and other officials from the Ministry of Communication and Media of our Honorable Minister. A good number of officials have joined our webinar. Inshallah, we have another webinar which will be on the 25th of May. We are working on that. Inshallah, we will invite all our participants to that particular webinar. So I take this opportunity again and again to thank all the participants, and may Allah reward us in this holiest month of Ramadan. We pray to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to protect the Ummah as well as humanity from all kinds of epidemic diseases and so on. Thank you very much again. Wa billah tawfiq wal hidayah. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.
Wa alaikum assalam wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Ma salam.